Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this WebEx lecture on nutrition, on the serial of online lecture series held by Semiorecon. And in this last online lecture series in 2019, we are pleased to collaborate with our colleague from International Medical University in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to discuss more about childhood obesity. So we already have here Dr. Wai Yang. So Dr. Yang is currently a senior lecturer in International Medical University Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and she's also get her PhD from the same university and her master from University of Sheffield in UK. And she has been researching and doing a lot of work in obesity, especially among children. So we are very pleased that today we're going to hear some updates on association between obesity and dietary patterns in children, especially in developing countries in Asia. So I think without further ado, I will give before that, we're going to start the question and answer session after the whole lecture from Dr. Yang. So please, if you have any question, you can just type in your question in the chat box, and I will moderating and will let Dr. Yang know the questions, and if needed, we may open your microphone so you can ask her directly. But in the meantime, we kindly request you to mute your microphone and maybe use headphones because sometimes it helps. And let us know if you cannot hear us clearly, so we will do some technical maintenance. Okay, so Dr. Yang, are you there in Kuala Lumpur? Good morning.
Yes.
Okay, so I think you can just start your valuable lectures, and we will continue with the discussion later.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is a great opportunity to be here to share a bit on my past and also current research in the area of obesity. So the topic that was being suggested and also agreed upon is to discuss on the association between obesity and dietary patterns, focusing on children and in Asia. So what I will share with the audience today, basically we will start with a bit of the background on the current status of child obesity in worldwide and also in Asia, and coming back to probably the region of Southeast Asia, and sharing the results of the systematic review that I have published a few years ago, and then we will kind of like have some update of the current status, what's happening now, and also with some take-home message of the association that we managed to mean some of the more concrete things. So this is the conceptual framework that I've been working on, and which guided my work so far. So I've started working in the area of child obesity in my job as a dietitian, and then continuing it into my PhD, which I completed a few years ago. So we know that child obesity largely contributed by either genetics or the environmental factors, and therefore when we look at the intervention program, we will take a step back to see what are the factors that likely contribute to the increase of the excessive weight amongst the children. And also at the same time, we are aware of the consequences of child obesity, and therefore we try to prevent the child from getting any sort of implication from having the excess weight. So moving on to the background, as we know that in terms of worldwide, the prevalence of child obesity has increased tremendously. And back in year 2014, where the Honest and colleagues reported that it's affecting more than 41 million of children under 5, and the prevalence are actually higher from the developing countries as compared to the high-income country. And more so when we come back to the Asia context, although comparatively when we look at the percentages, Asia has a lesser percentage as compared to the Middle Eastern or the African countries, but because we have high population density and we are experiencing very rapid rate of development. So basically we are facing a bigger magnitude of the impact of the prevalence from the increased prevalence of the child obesity. And just a bit of the background for Malaysia, as one of the developing countries in Asia, we observe about fourfold increase of the prevalence over the past 20 years. And the percentages are higher among these Malay children because they are the main ethnicity amongst the Malaysian population. So looking at briefly at the consequences of the child obesity, we know that physically it affects them because it has an implication towards their cardiovascular, metabolic, pulmonary, gastroenterology, and also their bone development. But more so, the immediate impact that we are more concerned of would be the impact. So therefore, when the psychological impact, it's really towards the social bias, the prejudice that they face, and also the discrimination that result into poor self-esteem, high anxiety level, and even some of them experiencing depression. They develop body shape dissatisfaction, and also some of them experiencing eating disorder. So overall, it has a very big impact towards the economic because of the whole healthcare cost implicated. And also at the same time, this will be the generation that is likely to having the risk of dying earlier or at the same age as their parents because they develop the chronic diseases at a much earlier age. So what we see is greater impact in the developing countries because our resources are limited, and at the same time we are dealing with a triple burden of malnutrition. We are also have undernutrition in this part of the world. We also still having micronutrient deficiency, and also then the overnutrition where we are discussing about the child obesity. So now let's look back at the contributory factors, which I would like to discuss a bit more. When it comes to the investigation of the genetic or the environmental factors, we kind of like look at the literature and find that when the review that was being published suggests that the children in the developing countries, especially those that are growing in the urban areas, experiencing rapid social development change and adopting a Western lifestyle, are likely to face a major risk of becoming obese. And also in the WHO report, it says that the obesity is predominantly driven by the environmental factors because of the rapid changes that is happening within a relatively stable population and within a short time period. So to start off with, the first factor that I would like to discuss would be the family environment. So as the famous quote say that a family that plays together stays together. And in the Asian context, this is very true because we tend to have a very close knit within our families, and there's a lot of social events, there's a lot of contact that is made within the family with the larger family of the grandparents, the uncles and the aunties. So the implication of the family environment could be greater as what compared to the developed world. And what we found in the literature would be there's a lack of the current research and publication into this aspect. And we've realized that the family environment should be something that is investigated when we are looking at the contributory factors of the weight or obesity in children. So just a few things to highlight when we talk about the family environment. Number one would be the higher prevalence that's observed within families and also the intergenerational transmission. So what it meant here would be if the parents are overweight or obese, that's 50% of the chances of the child to become overweight or obese in their lifetime. And also comparatively, this is an intergenerational thing. Why? Because if the grandparents are overweight, there's a likelihood of the parents to be overweight, and then it will also result in the grandchildren's generation as well. Second point will be the parents being the role model. So parents are the providers to the family, and this is inclusive of the food and also preparing the meals and making food available and accessible within the home environment. So there are studies that show that within the home environment that there is an association. If the parents' eating behavior is as such, there's a high chance that the child would also follow the same type of dietary pattern. And the third point would be the parents may or may not be able to recognize their child's weight problem. So in this part of the world whereby about 10 to 15 years ago, chubby children are known as or being labeled as healthy children. But we know that that is not the case because excessive weight could result into other consequences. So if the parents are able to recognize there's a weight problem, then there's a likelihood that they are able to then take the necessary action to tackle the issue early. And the fourth point will be there are certain ways of how the parents feed their child that could have positive influence towards the child's weight, and there are also those that can negatively influence the child's weight. So particularly if the parents pressure the child to eat, and especially if the child is underweight, there's a chance or there's a risk that the child will continue to be underweight. Whereas if it's the parents actually monitor the child to eat and they having the responsibility to positively influence the child, this would result in a healthier weight. And the last point within the family environment would be in this part of the world, the developing countries, children from the high income household are having higher risk of gaining more weight as compared to the evidence that was being projected from the developed world. So from this, we also find that the socio-economic factors could be one of the underlying factor that actually implicate with children from high income household having the higher risk of gaining excessive weight. The next point would be looking at the environmental factors, which then this is something that I would like to highlight in our perspective in the Asian context. So occurring parallel with the epidemiological transition is a major shift that we see from a country that is likely dependent on more traditional food and also then a more active lifestyle. We see that this change of the dietary pattern where food is available in more abundance and there's a reduction of the physical activity because of increased sedentary behavior and also with rapid urbanization. So the epidemiological shift translated into what we say it promotes the obesogenic environment, and therefore it is related to the excessive weight gain at the same time. So the next factor that I would like to elaborate here would be the energy expenditure. So the rapid change in the modern lifestyle have also been associated with significantly reduced demand for physical activity and increase of the sedentary behavior. So over the last decade, we see that this is happening both in the developed and also in the developing countries. And specifically, when we look at the literature, the reviews suggest that the results are inconsistent when they look at whether reduction of the physical activity actually leads to higher risk of overweight and obesity amongst children and adolescents. And the next one would be within the sedentary behavior, it may or may not be obesogenic. And in 2015, the WHO reported that amongst the school-going adolescent physical activity, the Southeast Asia region, which is the region that Malaysia is in, we have the least amount of physical activity as compared to the other regions of the world. So here we have adolescents reported about 74% of them being active, whereas if it's in the Eastern Mediterranean, it is up to about 88%. And of course, like what I mentioned earlier at the start of the lecture, being a dietitian, we are very much interested to know what are the dietary factors that are associated with the increase of the excessive weight amongst the children. So again, when we look at what is the underlying explanation here, because of diet contributes mainly to the energy intake, and there are specific food that has been also suggested that could likely increase the overall energy consumption, and this include things like sugar sweetened beverages, processed meat, and snacking on energy dense processed food. And at the same time, this evidence came from the developed countries, and we are not too sure whether the children from this part of the world actually are also having the same risk by consuming this type of the food. So what happened next was in the year of 2011, which is at the early stage of my PhD, we had a look at all the literature, and we found there were no systematic review that was published trying to investigate the association between the dietary patterns and obesity in children within this part of the world, specifically the developing countries. So the research team at that point of time decided that we will take a step forward to conduct a systematic review to see whether we can find anything that is relevant, and it can help us to then investigate the problem better and to then design the appropriate intervention program. So now moving on would be to share the results from the systematic review. So the systematic review had two main objectives. Number one would be to summarize the evidence on the prevalence of the childhood overweight and obesity within this part of the world. And number two is to synthesize the best epidemiological association between the dietary patterns and also the weight status of the children. So what happened was we actually had a search strategy structured in 3 steps, and at that point of time, it was done up till September of 2011. So the first step was looking into the relevant database to see whether there's any existing systematic review, which we found none. And from that database, we identified the keywords and the index terms. And then the step 3 was going on to the other published reports, articles, theses, or any unpublished ones that are relevant to the topic. So from there, we then actually identified the search terms that was used to see whether the articles meet the inclusion criteria. So because of our focus was very much looking at the dietary pattern. So that is one of the search key search terms. And number 2 would be the developing countries in Asia, which then that was based on the World Bank classification of the countries back in 2011. And in that case, it would already exclude Japan, Korea, and Singapore from our inclusion criteria, because this would be classified as the developed countries. So the outcome would be obesity, the weight status, and focusing in children, where we limit the age up to 18 years old and below. So after that, we assessed the studies for the relevance. We had a look at the title, we read the abstract, and look at the description and also the match heading. So for this systematic review, we have used the tool from the Joanna Briggs Institute, which is an equivalent center to the Cochrane Library of Systematic Review. And Joanna Briggs Institute is organized and coordinated by the University of Adelaide in Australia. So the tool used for critical appraisal consists of 9 questions that we have to answer to see the methodological quality of the identified studies. And the assessment was done by 2 independent reviewers, and when there's disagreement of the scoring, there was a third person that was involved until the consensus was reached. So all in all, we managed to retrieve the studies accordingly, and we had a further contacts with a number of the authors to clarify on the study methodology as well as the studies result that was reported. So from then, we move on to the data extraction stage, and because the JBI did not have a table that was suitable to us, then we had to modify from their tables of extraction to accommodate to our needs by incorporating the details like the study design, the sample size, the classification of the overweight and obesity, the measurement of the dietary pattern, and also then the outcome. So after that, we had a check on the completeness and the accuracy, and the next stage was supposed to be the data synthesis. And because of the variation of the statistical reporting, we were not able to do the method analysis, so we only managed to do a narrative summary of the results. So this is the flow chart of the identification, the screening, the eligibility, and the inclusion process of the articles. So initially, we identified about 2,000 over articles, and after we did some cleaning up of the screening, then we had only about 29 articles that were retrieved for detailed examination. So the ones that are included in the systematic review were 15 studies, but in 16 articles, because there were 1 study that were published twice, but we were included into our systematic review because they reported different outcomes. So these are the list of the studies, and based on the JBI template, this is how we determine the quality of the study. So out of the 16 articles, 2 scored the highest quality requirement, which is 9/9, the study from Vietnam and another study from China. And the other 2 that had the lowest scoring, it was 5/9, which include 1 study from Malaysia and the other study from Indonesia. So basically, from here, we see that majority of the studies were of the cross-sectional design. There were only 2 longitudinal studies from the Vietnam and China-Chinese population cohort. So what did we really find from all these included study at that time? There were variation of the standards being used to classify the children weight status back in the year 2011. So what we found, there are studies that use the IOTF classification. There were still some studies who used the older WHO 1995 classification, but there were also studies that used the newer guidelines. And some adopted the BMI for age that were from the CDC United States, And some countries also had their own national standards. So this include the Indian, China, and also the Thai population. So overall, based on this classification, we had a wide range of the prevalence rates, which started from about 5% up to about 20%, with no specific trend in the age or the gender. When we look at the dietary pattern, there were many ways that the researchers from this part of the world were reporting the dietary pattern. Also because there's no standardized terminology or definition for the dietary pattern, so we had to pull the results together and try to organize it based on 4 approaches. So what we managed to pull here would be whether it's reported as nutrient intake. Number 2, whether it's reported under food groups. Number 3, the dietary behavior, which include eating out, eating fast food, snacking, drinking sugar, sweetened beverages, eating sugar and sweets. And the last one would be related to the child feeding behavior. So all in all, at that point of time in 2011, we did not really find consistent statistical association. That means within the 4 approaches that we wanted to explain the findings, there were results that were promoting child obesity, and at the same time, within the same approach, they also had the explanation of how certain dietary patterns were associated with protection against child obesity. So the first one was on the nutrient intake. The ones that were promoting excessive weight gain related to the highest tertile and the total energy intake, and also the highest tertile of the protein intake, whereas high carbohydrate intake could actually be protective against child obesity. The next one on the fruits and vegetables, infrequent intake of vegetables and also fruits were associated with higher risk of child obesity, whereby if the child eats a high and frequent diet of fruits and vegetables, and one study found eating preserved fruit were associated with a reduced risk. As for the meat intake, high meat consumption and also intake of mutton and beef soup were found to increase the risk of childhood overweight and obesity. And looking at the eating out and fast food, there were results suggesting that frequent eating out and also frequent Western fast food actually are putting the child at risk of excessive weight gain. Snacking, frequent snacking, and eating chips about 1 serving weekly were associated with this risk. But at the same time, if they were eating between meals and also there were presence of snacking, they also can be protected. So it's a bit inconclusive from the for snacking. And for sugar sweetened beverages, mainly it was stronger to suggest that frequent and daily intake of soft drinks could actually increase the risk. For child feeding behavior, certain things that were associated with higher risk include the maternal restriction of snack. If the child is not fussy or selective about food, if they're eating very fast and they have high response towards food and they enjoy food, this could be putting them at risk. So all in all, from this particular systematic review, it is the first to investigate the association, but it is also limited by a few things that we could not do, because number one, we excluded about 10 papers that were non-English language, and also because of the design are mainly cross-sectional, so we cannot establish the causal relationship here, and it was difficult to compare due to the differences in statistical reporting and the many ways of reporting dietary patterns. So from there, from the review itself, we had some recommendation towards the practice and also in research. So number one would be dietitians specifically and the nutritionists, if possible, to continue to monitor the effects on the dietary changes towards the weight and also the health status of the children. So, and for research-wise, we suggest that there should be more valid measures to be used to measure the dietary intake, and also the use of more standardized growth chart to determine overweight and obesity. And of course, if possible, to conduct a longitudinal study to explore the causal relationship between the diet and also the child weight status. So from there, based on the results from the systematic review, then what we did at that time, we were supposed to implement the intervention program to address the child obesity in Malaysia. But we decided, based on the results of the systematic review, that we could not establish which are the contributory factors that it's the most significant one affecting the overweight and obesity. So we then decided to investigate the contributory factors. And in Malaysia, we investigated the Malay population, and the study was known as the Family Diet Study. So that is what we decided at that point of time, because we realized that we need to build the base of the knowledge and strengthen the background instead of moving forward to implement the intervention program. But having to say that, let's look at what's been done in Asia in terms of the weight management program. So as you can see from the few slides that I will share here, all in all, there are actually about, in total, more than 10 studies that were being implemented and published in the literature, and mainly from China. Altogether, there's about 6 studies published from the Chinese population of what they have actually done, 4 from Malaysia, and so these are the Chinese studies, different parts of China. The 4 from Malaysia for the past 10 years, and then from India, there's 1 study, 3 from Thailand, and 1 from Taiwan. And in that, what we actually have kind of like summarized would be, there are definitely increasing number of the intervention program in this part of the world. They are mainly school-based, because that will be more feasible to intervene because they are school-going children. However, the duration of the intervention and the sample size vary from country to country. The intervention approach focuses on the diet as well as the physical activity, and the main outcome measure that is reported on the body mass index, changes of the weight status, and also some look at the metabolic profile. So all in all, for the intervention program, it does favor the intervention group. So from then, what do we do? So as of today, I've actually looked back at the literature, and there's not much being done to look at the association, and there's no new published systematic review. So what I did, we had a quick look at the database again, mainly from Medline, and to look for any existing systematic review, which none, and using the same search terminology, trying to see whether we identifying new publication, and from there to look at the studies that's being retrieved. So all in all, I found about more than 2,000 articles, which is from the year 2011 onwards until today. So this suggests that there's a lot more of the evidence, and also the interest in looking at the association. And what is interesting is also how the studies are describing their findings. So from the time of what happened back then, about 7 years ago, things are a bit more scattered. But nowadays, the publication and the findings are suggesting a relationship of energy, fruits and vegetables, eating out, eating fast food, snacking, drinking sugar-sweetened beverages, association of the parental feeding practices and how fast the child is eating and the risk of gaining weight excessively. So just a very brief summary from about 76 articles that I managed to look through. So from here, the ones that are promoting excessive weight gain would be excessive energy intake, irregular meals, frequent Western fast food, and intake of sugar-sweetened beverages. Whereas the ones that are found to be protective would be having breakfast every day, high and frequent fruits and vegetables diet, and presence of snacking. So to elaborate further on these points would be number one on those dietary patterns that are found to promote child obesity. So number one would be on the energy intake. So we know that if there's an overall increase of the energy intake, and especially coming from the fats, therefore the diet itself would be high in the energy density, and biologically it will be likely to increase the body weight and also then the BMI over time. And on the fast food itself, we know that within the developing world and in this part of the world in Asia, the fast food industry is expanding rapidly. So fast food, the meal contains a high energy density, and it does increase the overall density of the Asian diet. And when a person eats out, it is also again associated with higher energy intake and also fats intake, likely due to the selection of the food that they have. Whereby for the sugar-sweetened beverages, high and frequent intake has a protective measure towards the development of overweight and obesity, likely because of the it doesn't really increase it does actually increase the overall energy intake, and also it has a very low satiety level. The next point would be on the protective dietary patterns associated with child obesity. So those who are consuming breakfast regularly, and in the studies that defined it as everyday, it was significantly less likely to become overweight or obese as compared to those who skip their breakfast. So in Malaysia, we have up to about 75% of our children that reported to skip their breakfast almost every day. And in that situation, they also find out that it is a dose-dependent manner in terms of the relationship. For the fruits and vegetables, it is beneficial based on the reports from the Western country. And because fruits and vegetables has high satiety effect, and also is much lower in terms of the energy density. So this can displace the energy dense food from the diet, and therefore reducing the total energy intake. For snacking, it is a bit inconsistent. Why? Because both the Western style, the snacks like chips, candy, soda, these are widely available in the developing countries. And at the same time, the local snacks are also widely available. So in that situation, it was suggested that probably the local snacks have a lower energy density as compared to the Western style. So if they consume or opt for the local snacks, therefore they are protected from the risk of excessive weight gain. So in conclusion, I would like to suggest that within the developing Asian countries, the westernization of the Asian diet could increase the risk of child overweight and obesity, whereby if we are still following the traditional Asian dietary patterns, that could protect the child from gaining excessive weight. So at this current moment, an update of the systematic review is underway, and the research team aim to publish it sometime next year. So with that, I would like to thank Simeo Refon and I'm you for providing me with this opportunity, and I look forward to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yang, for your presentations. And I think we learned a lot this morning about childhood obesity. And I think all of us already realized that there's an increasing rate of childhood obesity among Asian countries. I mean, we can also see in our daily lives that a lot of children is actually getting obese, not only in urban population, but also in rural area. And I think you highlight the important, one of the important factor that really interested for me is that we are lack of research in this part of the region where we try to see the relationship between genetics and environmental factors, especially dietary pattern. That's why I thank you for sharing your work. Hopefully, some of the participants of this WebEx is also a researcher, and I was wondering whether if you know some studies that may help you with the systematic review, will that be something interesting for you that we can also contribute to your systematic review work? We found out a study that may be related to the subject.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. Definitely in the updated search, we have found several studies and articles published from the Indonesian. Mainly, one of the large study which Malaysia is involved is the SINAT study, the Southeast Asian Nutrition Study. So, but definitely, if you have other studies that you can share with me, I would be more than happy to include in the systematic review, because I realize that we need to work together in order to establish a better and more concrete evidence in order to tackle this important issue that's affecting our young generation.
Okay, then thank you so much. Then maybe later we will also share your contact, or if anyone have a study that will be helpful for Dr. Yang's work, you can just contact us. Okay, so I already have some question here from the audience. So the first question is from Diana Folida. She's asking how to develop a policy at school canteen to avoid obesity. So maybe you have some insights from the articles that you have reviewed about the school canteen policy to prevent obesity.
Okay, thank you for the questions. In terms of the policy, I personally not involved yet in developing the policy, but basically what I see in Malaysia as an example, policies are made from the governmental agencies, and usually the governmental agencies involving the officers, and they consist of the professionals that are from the nutrition and dietetics background. However, some of the policies are limited because, for example, in the school canteen setting, we need to work very closely with another government agency, which would be the Ministry of Education. So when it is multiple governmental agencies involved, the implementation could be limited due to the fact that it's not that we don't work closely together. Sometimes it is good. The things are being put on paper based on their suggestion, but the implementation at the ground, it's having the difficulty because of many limitations on the ground. So therefore, development of the policy usually would be successful, but it is the difficulty to implement and also to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the particular policy on the ground. I mean, that is my viewpoint in terms of the policy.
Thank you for the answer. So the next question comes from Sahra. So basically she was asking about, because we're not just having a problem with obesity, we all of this country in the region having a double burden malnutrition issues. So sometimes maybe in the community setting, especially maybe in school settings, to have an intervention that only cover overweight or obesity children is not enough. We have to also think about the underweight children. So what do you think about that? How we can, I think the question is there any strategies where we can in the same time reduce the prevalence of obesity, but also thinking about the underweight children?
Thank you for the question. I definitely agree that because in this population, we are handling the double burden, the two extreme weight status of our children, the obese and also the underweight. So therefore, when in terms of the intervention, it is likely to not only focus on one category, especially if it's school-based or community-based, it has to address towards a healthy weight. So when it's healthy weight, it will help both this group of the children to learn to become healthy and to eat healthily, to have a healthy lifestyle, so that the overweight or the obese one will reduce their weight or maintain their weight until they grow out of it. And whereas for the ones from the underweight category, they are able to gain the weight accordingly to catch up to their growth. So that's why if it's a community-based or a school-based intervention, it has to be targeted towards a healthy intervention weight program rather than it is a weight reduction or weight gain program, if you understand what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. We can't really differentiate them because they are all growing, and children being children, they usually are very interested in joining programs because they want to be part of it. So it is really the work of the researcher or the government agencies that are involved to engage both these populations together and then execute the program accordingly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. So you can really differentiate. You can just have to develop a program that basically asks the children to eat well, balanced nutrition. I think that should be what happened in school in this community setting. So I have a question somehow related. The next question from Hafiz Dotun Nabawiyah. So she was asking actually how we can intervene child with obesity, because sometimes they feel bullied if they were included in special program to reduce their weight. So maybe how can we intervene this child with obesity without making them become the object of bullying at school?
Like what you say, Dr. Grace, you for this question is related to what the previous questions. Usually, when we single out the child, then they will be affected. So even before we intervene, they themselves being big, because of currently the awareness towards child obesity has increased tremendously. They're already experiencing some form of discrimination or some bias socially. So that's why if it's a community-based program, it will need to address majority of the people, so that then the target will be everyone will become healthy. Let's eat healthily together. We learn how to eat balanced diet together. We learn to have an active lifestyle, increase our physical activity, reduce the sedentary behavior. Because at the end of the day, it is what I said earlier, we want the children to grow healthily based on what their developmental stage, so that everyone will be in the program together and not felt that they actually are left out, or if they actually are selected, they actually are not keen because they know that it is targeted to them because of their weight. Grace? Grace? I can not sure about the connection, Grace, but I can see there's another question here. So most of the children like to eat snacks. It's stated before that local snacks are better than Western snacks. However, most of the local snacks also contains of high energy. So what kind of local snacks that can be given to the children? So in this situation, like what I was trying to explain earlier on, in the paper that they found that snacking was protective, they look at what type of snack that was being taken or given to the child. So they realized that these are the local snacks. They give example like fruits, yogurt, as what that was offered or given to the child rather than the ones that it's candy, soda or chips. So it is working within the energy density of the food. So if the local snacks are low in energy, therefore they will be more suitable to be given to the children as compared to the ones that are highly sweetened or has a high fat content like fried items or the sugar coated and the sugar sweetened beverages type. So then if it's like you have a local drink that it's like in Malaysia currently, we have the bubble tea epidemic. So wherever you go, you see people carrying a bubble tea. So that is not a healthy local drink because it is very, very high in terms of the sugar and also with the input of the what we call that, the creamer, then the fats content is also high. So that's where it is actually a very high density drink. So that will not be a suitable alternative as we call to the other types of the local snacks, like if it's basically fruits or even biscuits that are non-coated, the local snacks like your some what we call the tubers, all these that actually can be given during their break time.
Yeah, so yes, local snacks here is, I agree, you have to also look at what kind of snacks, yeah, because if you say that it's Western snacks, nowadays, I think in our region we have more also like other Asian snacks like Korean snacks, which is like, and Taiwanese, like bubble tea and stuff like that,
Yes,
also
yes.
have a lot of sugar contained sweet beverage, so it's not just per se that local is Eastern snack is better, but you have to see what kind of type. So I
Yeah.
have, I think this is the last question, or so from Dian Setiaji is asking about the obesity management program on overweight obesity. So actually, maybe the question is more related to how we can increase the compliance of the children to do the programs. Is it rewarding them is more valuable than maybe giving punishment, or how we can make them continue engaged to the program?
Um, Thank you for the questions. The answer is not straightforward. Why? Because the engagement and the continuation into the intervention program would be important to see the effect of the intervention. Having to say that most of the time, the engagement would be more sustainable if it's a positive reinforcement rather than working on the penalty uh, penalty concept. So if it's positive reinforcement, that means if they make positive changes or they make some effort towards increasing their physical activity, reducing the sedentary behavior, eating more fruits and vegetables, reducing the overall energy intake by controlling their portion, reduce of fried food or high fat food consumption, sugar sweetened beverages. So all this has to be very clearly stated in the intervention program so that the child will know what to look for, and when they are able to achieve a small change, they are being reinforced with some incentive. It need not be money, it can be just they are collecting points like what currently what we are doing. We give incentive by giving reward of points, and when they accumulate certain points, they're able to then move on to a next stage. So these are things that we can think of to promote and also to cultivate the culture of a positive change within the child and also with their family. Because like what I've mentioned also, although it is a mini school-based program, majority of this program also included the parents by inviting them to come. So the family environment also has to change at the same time, because if the child asks for fruits, but the mother doesn't provide it at home, or the school environment doesn't sell fruit. So all this would mean that it is difficult for the child to increase the outcome that we want to see, which is increase of fruits consumption. So then the environment that they are in, the school, the family, would need to also come together in order to help the child to achieve the positive outcome. So BMI would probably be the primary outcome that usually the researchers are looking for. But in order to result into the BMI change, we know that it is the contribution of the energy intake and also then the energy expenditure. So that's why it has to work hand in hand together for us to achieve the results that's intended to be measured at the end of the duration of the program. I mean, that is what I think would be most helpful for the child.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yang, for so I think we still have time for one last question. It's actually more asking for more tips. So how we can make children, especially the obese children, eating vegetables? Is there any tips from you?
Okay, we are currently starting a pilot study here in INU to look at taste sensitivity amongst children. So this is with the hypothesis that obese children has a higher reaction. They are more sensitive towards bitter taste, which associated with vegetables. Therefore, they reject vegetables as compared to other tastes. So that is our hypothesis in this pilot study. So we are starting it soon. So hopefully we can have some results by end of this year to help us to know and inform us better whether it is really that the obese children doesn't like to eat vegetables, or there are other factors that are resulting to it. Because there's also the other school of thought saying that probably the other weight categories children, they are less sensitive towards the sweetness and also towards bitterness. That's how they can regulate their food intake better, because they don't have specific preference due to their taste sensitivity. So how to make children like to eat vegetables? This is again, I would say, it goes back to the infancy stage, and probably also during the gestational period, because the taste exposure starts from the womb. So what the mother actually eats will also establish that taste preferences, and then it continues after delivery and at infancy. If it's being breastfed, we also realize that the literature has suggested that they have certain preference of the taste. So all these would be going back to the early stage of life. But of course, when they are already obese now, we have to think of something to make them eat vegetables. So I would say encourage them to be involved in food preparation. They will definitely reject it at the beginning. I mean, from what we know, that there are certain children, and with certain types of food, you need to at least expose them about 20 times before they are willing to accept the new taste and the new food. So that's where involving them in the food preparation, letting them explore how vegetables can be eaten differently Either it is raw, it's stir fry, it's cooked in the different methods, and how we can actually present it differently. So all this will engage the child better instead of just forcing him or her to eat at the dining table. So it starts from the preparation stage, from the purchasing as well. So they are being exposed to how best vegetables, or even, I mean, in this situation, fruits can be presented and then can be eaten, which is not too bad at all.
Yeah, thank you so much for the tips, Dodaya. I think in the last two questions, you highlight the importance of parents' involvement in this kind of program and how they can actually teach their children how to eat, because eating is also a learning process. So unfortunately, we already it's already 11 here in Jakarta, so it is 12 in your place, Dr. Yang. It's time for lunch. So I won't keep you out from lunch. Thank you so much for giving this the lecture this today, and also thank you so much to all participants who have contributed actively in this session. I wish you all happy holidays. Enjoy. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next year in the next online lecture series from Senior Rec. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you.